Good evening, everyone. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining our ParkHouseConnects session. Today, we are going to talk about dyslexia, understanding dyslexia. And we are very lucky because we've got more special guests today. It's not only me this time. So I'm going to lead that session. And to those parents who know me, I'm Ms. Kasia, and I'm Head of Inclusion at ParkHouse. Our second presenter will be Mrs. Hannah Johnson. Mrs. Johnson is our Year 6 class teacher, and she's also a dyslexia teacher. And then we're going to have our lovely Mrs. Marizelle, who works in our inclusion team. She's our learning support assistant, but also certified dyslexia therapist. And last but not least, we are going to hand over to our guest speaker, very special guest speaker, Mrs. Sandra Stark, who is the CEO and founder of Stark Griffin Dyslexia Academy. And we are very lucky to cooperate with the Academy, and Miss Marizelle at the moment is running some dyslexia program which were designed at Stark and Griffin Dyslexia Academy. So, understanding dyslexia, and we are going to start with trying to answering the question, well, is it a gift or is it a curse? Because very often our parents who hear from the teachers, oh, your child shows signs of dyslexia, they get absolutely petrified and they think about labeling the children. And yes, sometimes it can be that curse, labeling the child. But today we would like to talk about positive sides of identifying dyslexia on time and what effect it can have of a child and a learner when it's diagnosed on time. So we'll be raising awareness. We'll be sharing ideas how to support learners with dyslexia or learners who are displaying dyslexic symptoms, how to identify those dyslexic symptoms in mainstream classrooms, but also probably you will see that some of those symptoms you can identify at home. We will talk about the strategies for supporting children with dyslexic difficulties, and we will be talking about the importance of diagnosis, and our guest speaker will be providing some advice as well, how to support children at home, and Miss Marizelle as well will advise you how to support your children at home. And then we are going to talk about some services which are available to help parents and children online and also here in Doha. So what do they have in common? As you probably all expect, those famous people, very, very successful people, they are all dyslexic. And they talk about dyslexia quite openly about their dyslexia, and actually they talk about it like at the beginning when they didn't know that they were dyslexic, it was a curse. They found learning very difficult, they struggled in school, very often they were labeled as stupid, and they think of themselves, they thought of themselves as stupid, and obviously it was affecting their self-esteem. And then after diagnosis, everything changes because everything starts making sense. Well, actually, I'm not stupid. I am, I just think in a different way. And that different way of thinking is leading to may lead to very successful life. And now I'm going to hand over to Mrs. Hannah Johnson, who is going to talk about signs and symptoms of dyslexia, which we notice in mainstream classroom during our lessons. So I'm handing over to Mrs. Johnson.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. So, signs and symptoms of dyslexia. So, the earlier a child is identified as having dyslexia, we can accommodate and we can support children through school. So, I just wanted to mention some signs and symptoms that you might see within the classroom, but also things that you may spot at home as well. So it's about looking at spoken language. Maybe a child might find reading or spelling a little bit tricky, or finding aspects of it more difficult. They might have a smaller range of vocabulary. Their handwriting may be more might have poor handwriting or motor skills as well. They poor organisation and time management, and also the working memory capacity is reduced. That's one that I think is quite a key one, is about the memory and working on that memory as well, and that's quite a way of identifying dyslexia as well. Something I do want to say is dyslexia exists from birth, and the signs of dyslexia can change with age. So it can change, it can become more severe, it can also, the children find strategies, and they can become quite capable and coping with their dyslexia as well. So dyslexia is not the same for every child. It's very different in different situations, and every child is unique who has dyslexia. Is it all right to go on to the next slide? Sorry. Thank you. Okay, so how can a teacher accommodate dyslexia learning? So in the classroom, it's really important to identify dyslexia or a child who might have dyslexia tendencies. So as soon as a teacher identifies that, they can start putting things into place to support that child. As Miss Kasha said before, dyslexia isn't a curse, it's just a different way of learning, and it's really important to understand that, because the children I've taught who got dyslexia are very talented children. It's just sometimes that they need more support in different ways. So it is really important to remember that it is important so that we can find strategies to support that child. So here are just some examples that we can do to accommodate that child with dyslexia. So for example, classroom management, so just making sure that they have simple routines. If a child is finding their memory difficult, it's not overloading them with too much information, because if they are doing a task within the class and they have too much information, it becomes an overload. So it's making sure that the pace or their instructions are broken down into small chunks. Also the materials, so providing the children with certain materials that can support them. It might be that they need a coloured sheet over for reading. It could be that they need a different hand grip. There's lots of different things. Like I said before, it is quite a wide spectrum, so not one thing will suit every child. So that's why it's quite important as teachers, as parents, that we also ask for advice from experts as well to find out what can support your child. Like I said before, dyslexia is a spectrum, and they might have strengths in certain areas and weaknesses in others. So again, it's really important to identify where that weakness is so that it can be accommodated and the children flourish in that environment. So I've put here, it's not a one size fits all, because every child is unique, and it's really important to understand that as well. These are just some simple tweaks that I had done in the classroom, but also you could do at home as well. One big thing that I find really strengthens children with dyslexia memory is doing memory games. So it could be simple memory games like where you have cards and they've got to match them. It could be you have items on a table and you remove one and the children have got to remember what's been removed. One that I do quite often is the alphabet arc. So I place the alphabet around. The children have got to name the alphabet, and you remove a letter, and the children have got to identify which letter has been removed. But that also helps with naming the alphabet, the letters, and also the sounds of the alphabet as well. One other handy one is the fonts. So when you're using printouts or worksheets, it's about giving them the correct font that will help them. So sans serif fonts are handy because they don't have like lines or too much detail on their text. Again, some books now are dyslexia friendly, so they do have fonts that make it easy for the children to read. Using devices is really key as well. So we're in the 21st century at the moment, and obviously devices are everywhere. So using those to support the children is also vital as well. These ones are interesting ones. So using colour. So when if you can see the top one where it says the first painter, sorry, that is when a child is copying So it might be they're copying from the board, or they might be copying a piece of information. The information can become too blurred, or they may get easily confused. So each sentence or each line can be done in a different colour, and that will then help the children to see where they're up to before they move on to the next part as well. It just allows them to organise and follow instructions easily. Again, I said earlier about covers when they're reading, but sometimes you can also use background colours to help what the children read and understand what's being presented to them. This mind map one is quite an interesting one. So if some children with dyslexia do find organising their work difficult, so it's really important that they can use different strategies to help them. So it might be that they have a circle where it's the information that they want to talk about, and then around the sides they might have other circles that they can then discuss in further detail. So that just helps them to present their work and structure their work as well. The dual coding with teachers, again, is based on symbols. So children linking symbols to words. It's something that we can use within the classroom, but also at home as well. So you may find it easier for the children. So in class, it might be, for example, it's simple as punctuation. So you might have a symbol for using speech marks or inverted commas or exclamation marks, or it might be when you're structuring work, a symbol to show that you've got to do paragraphs. This is because some children find it easier with the visual of pictures rather than the writing of words as well. So you can just link it with images, and it just allows the children to connect that picture to the meaning as well. So sorry, I should have said I will hand over to Miss Mariselle now. So sorry.
No problem, no problem. Good evening, everybody. I've been working with these children for 3 years now. The dyslexia, and when they come to me, it's normally when the teacher used the strategy in class that doesn't work, and then they come to me. And for the first few weeks, they're very wary of me. So most of the time in the beginning, we actually just play. We may just play chess, we may just play cards, we do memory activities or processing activities until they start trusting me. And then from there on, we work further. And then we do some visual perception activities, auditorial activities, lateral direction activities, basic stuff that's not using a pen and paper most of the times, because these children want to be visual. And sometimes I have to think on my feet, because somewhere we have to get some reading on. Even if I have to build a stadium with words on it so that they can read it with each block that they put down, and they don't realize that they're busy learning. So most of the time, that's how I work. Can I have the next slide, please? No. Then we go through this whole process of specifically which strand of dyslexia they have, and then I work out a program. Some of the programs are 6 weeks, some of them are 36 weeks. The children that's been diagnosed, I try and see 3 days a week for 20 minutes. So really, honestly, I cannot do miracles with them in that time. So one day we will play games like the visual stuff. The next day we may work on sounds, especially phonological awareness. And then the third day, we will work on reading strategies. The reason why I have reading on here is most of you parents, which I do understand, being dyslexic myself and having a child with dyslexia, you want your child to be the best reader. They must sit down and they must read for 20 minutes or an hour a day. Please don't do that to your child. Start reading for them, because vocabulary is just as important as them reading for you. When they start reading and they can read a bit, let them read for the dog, because you know a dog doesn't have any criticism. They don't talk back. They're lovable. So your child will feel more comfortable reading with a dog. You can sit on the background. That's fine. your child is practicing reading. Auditorial reading, where you have story types. You know, in the olden days when I was still young and on the farm, we had the radio and there was story time on the radio. That's also so important because it also increases the auditorial listening skills and vocabulary. And then you will see I have a lady there in a sandpit. Sometimes I have to read a story to a little child and then I have to ask them to see if they understand what I've read for them, and then they will display the story on the sand tray for me and tell me what the story is all about. So most of the time you have to be innovative, you have to think on your feet to keep them interested. Next slide, please. Oh, on the previous slide, don't go back, there is a Facebook link, Learning Reading. This lady is also a qualified dyslexia therapist. She does assessments for reading and she specializes in reading. If I can give you advice, join her group. She has got the most amazing knowledge and ideas to be creative with your reading. Then the last thing that you always also have to think of is a sensitive, I can't even pronounce the word, technology to help your child with dyslexia. This year we have started in schools, so from year 4, year 5, year 6, it all depends. We start bringing in for the dyslexia child computers. They must bring one from home with a letter from their parents. So it's their own responsibility because we also want to teach them responsibility. And they start using this computer in school. The reason for that is they are moving up to secondary. The pace is going to get harder and longer writing skills that they have to do. Teach them now. So by the time they're there, they know how it works and they feel comfortable with it. In the long run, that is what's going to happen to them. I've got a reading, the C pen there. Shanae says straightforward, Mom, it's too slow. She doesn't feel comfortable with the C pen. And then we have a pencil grip and the slow board that we also have in school. Very interesting. When the children are small, year 3, beginning of year 4, we give them all this assessment, assistive technology. They don't want to use it. They feel embarrassed. And then you will see year by year 5, year 6, they say, Miss, can we start using it in the classrooms? Then they feel comfortable. They feel comfortable with the equipment because they see it works for them. And then extremely another important thing. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. You as parent must not hide that your child has dyslexia. You have to sit down with your child and explain it to them because they really think they're stupid to use that word, because I never use that word. Nobody's stupid. Everybody's got talents. And as soon as you start talking to him about dyslexia and what it is and how amazing it is, you will see a shift in your child's personality and confidence. Because the most important thing is to build up your child's confidence and let him realize he's unique. He's got talents. And as a parent, when you hear this, I know it, I went through it, you are shocked. Because then you get, my child is not perfect syndrome. My child is not a perfect child. Calm down, go and have your coffee, go and cry your eyes out in your room, do it. And then relax and start thinking, what am I going to do about this? Try and always stay positive. I know it's difficult because I've got different strategies to learn. I can see it with my 2 children, but you have to stay positive. Then get yourself educated. You don't have to do massive stuff. Like I said, the learning reading Facebook app is fantastic. Then there's a little short courses I've got for you on there. That's also fantastic. Then you have YouTube. Then you have Sandra stuff when you really, really want to go into it and maybe be a therapist. It's very important that you have knowledge about dyslexia. Then the next step is be positive, the whole family. Then find your child's talent and work on it. The most important thing is loving, because they are special. They are the most amazing children to work with, especially when you sit and talk to them and you realize their knowledge. They've got some amazing knowledge. It's unbelievable. Okay, and now it's over to Sandra. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for this wonderful opportunity to share my passion with you. I would like to talk about dyslexia and how it's going to affect you as a family and your child, and the signs that you will see when you are identifying your particular child with this learning disability. That picture explains it all. She comes to me crying and wanting to know why she is stupid, because that's what they think dyslexia is. They feel stupid. So what is dyslexia? If you can try and read on the following slide, if you can show us, are you able to see what that small sentence says? Let's read it together. You may find this hard to read. Imagine if everything you looked at, if everything you read looked like this. Even I can't read that. Now imagine how someone with dyslexia has to read all their textbooks. On the following slide, you will also see this is how dyslexics perceive text. Imagine you have to learn a subject with text written like this. And on the following slide, you will see this is a passage written by a fourth grader, one of my students. If you can go on, please, Natasha. It says, I'm going to explain to you what this paragraph says, because the mom had to explain to me what this paragraph said. It reads, while the goat was eating grass, the cat was playing with the ball. While my mom was cooking jam, the zebra and me were swimming in the dam at my sister's wedding. Can you imagine this is what this child, dyslexic child, was trying to say, and yet this is exactly how his writing ended up. So it's very difficult for these dyslexic children to convey their message. Now, the International Dyslexia Association defines dyslexia as a neurological based and a familial disorder. It's the next slide, which interferes with the acquisition and processing of language. It varies in degrees of severity, and it is manifested by difficulties in receptive and expressive language, including reading, writing, spelling, handwriting, and sometimes in arithmetic. But the dyslexia of arithmetic or mathematics is called dyscalculia. That's a different topic for another day. I would like Kasia to share the next little video clip with us for you to understand dyslexia more.
Class, turn to page 38, chapter 4, paragraph 3. We're going to mark adjectives today. That goes for you as well, Ishana Basti. Page 38, chapter 4, paragraph 3. Can I have your attention, Ishan? Ishan! I said page 38, chapter 4, paragraph 3. Read the first sentence and point out the adjectives. Page 38, Ishan. Aditlaba, just help the boy. Come on, the rest of you, look into your books. Read the first sentence and tell me what the adjectives are. Okay, come on. Let's all mark the adjectives together. Just read the sentence for me. Just read the sentence, Ishan.
ये तो नाच रहे.
Silence. Speak in English.
The letters are dancing.
They're dancing, are they? Okay, then read the dancing letters. Trying to be funny? Read the sentence loud and proper. I said loud and proper, Ishan. Loud and proper. Loud and proper. Stop it! Enough is enough. Get out. Get out of my class.
So can you imagine, this is what dyslexic children experience every single day in the classroom. Now, the National Institute of Health found that dyslexia affects 20% of all children. It also affects boys and girls equally. The reason for that is so often we think that more boys are dyslexic, but they are the ones that actually act out more in class, and they are the ones that are prone to get referred more often than the girls. It is also the leading cause of reading failure and school dropouts across the world. It is also the most common shared characteristic of juvenile offenders, and it is not outgrown. So what are the key features of someone with dyslexia? Number one, these youngsters, individuals, children and adults have average to above average IQ. I once had a little boy who had an IQ of 136, but he couldn't write his own name. Unfortunately, their tests don't resemble their true potential. And this leads to a poor self-esteem because they don't pass their grades, and yet they know that they are capable of much more. But they get excluded from the peer groups, and that leads to a lot of frustration and emotional outbursts in class. The reason for this is also people don't understand, and especially teachers and other friends and peers in the group, they do not understand what this child is going through. They don't understand how this child's brain is working, and it's vice versa as well, because the child doesn't understand that the teacher and the other friends' brains do not work the same as his or hers. So they often tend to daydream, as you could see in that video clip now with Ishan, and then they are often misdiagnosed or labeled as being ADHD. But can you imagine if you had to face a piece of Chinese writing for the entire school day? Would you sit still? Wouldn't you start talking to your friend next to you? Wouldn't you ask to leave the room often? It's really very difficult for these persons. Just imagine you cannot read a menu, you cannot read a road sign, you cannot read any instructions to do whatever. It's very, very difficult for them. So they also read and write with additions, with omissions, substitutions, repetitions, and reversals. They confuse left and right, up and down, and they battle a lot with time management. They can't tell time, and it's difficult for them to be on time. They also mispronounce phrases in words and sentences, and like Hannah has already mentioned, they have a very poor working memory. In other words, working things out and a sequence in their minds. So we know now from what we've heard from our previous speakers that dyslexic children have difficulty with reading, spelling especially, writing and related language skills. We also know that it is a lifelong condition. You do not outgrow dyslexia. It never skips a generation, and that Sally Shaywitz has proved. with lots of extensive research. So one of our first questions that we do ask is there any family history of someone that has battled with reading or spelling, or maybe someone that has left school early? It runs in families, and remember, it is not a neurological issue. It is a neurological issue. It is not a character flaw. So if we go on to the IQ score slide, you will see there that through a lot of research also done by Dr. Shaywitz from the Yale Center for Dyslexia in the United States, you will see that your typical reader's IQ level and reading levels are linked. It's in the green graph on the left side. The dyslexic person, however, or the dyslexic child's reading ability and their IQ abilities are completely, there are such huge discrepancies between the two, and they are not linked at all because they diverge, meaning that your child's non-verbal and verbal abilities are not the same, and they differ a lot. Now I'm going to ask all of our listeners a question. If you read silently, whether you read a newspaper or whether you are reading a magazine, or maybe a letter from one of your parents, maybe your mom, do you actually hear a sound in your voice? Do you hear the story that is being told in that text as a commentary in your mind? I presume that most of you can hear that little voice inside your head, otherwise you will be unable to read silently. Now this is unfortunately one of the characteristics of being dyslexic. They don't have that internal speech that can decipher text for them and read it to them in their heads like a commentary. So we say that dyslexics are visually deaf. What does that mean? In the following animation video, you'll see that the girl sees the word, but she doesn't hear it internally. In other words, there's nothing wrong with her eyes. She can see it, but she doesn't hear it, which makes her visually deaf. Now, another scenario is where we ask a child to write a word. This dyslexic child can actually hear the word, but they don't see the symbols of the word in their minds. Instead, they look for a picture that they can associate with that word. So they can hear it, nothing wrong with their ears, but they don't see it in their minds. Just think of a simple word like immediately. When that word comes to mind and you need to write it down, the first thing you think about is how many M's are there, how many L's are there in this word, and what are the possibilities of spelling the word immediately. Not with a dyslexic mind. The dyslexic will rather try and search for a picture that they can associate with the word immediately, that can decipher that meaning of the word to them. So we say being dyslexic is being visually deaf and auditory blind. Now, if you look at the next picture, I am sure you all know the story of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And how fast can you run the movie and the story through your mind, thinking of the Seven Dwarfs and exactly what happened in the story? Well, this is how dyslexics think. They are mainly picture thinkers. And that actually makes them extremely fast thinkers. Because a dyslexic person can see up to 10,000 pictures per minute, whereas your average reader can read up to 250 to 280 words per minute. And the school system expects of those children who are dyslexic to translate those 10,000 pictures into 250 to 280 words, which is virtually impossible because they are not linear thinkers. In the next little animation gift, you will see this is the story of Snow White. So you might be able to recognize it. If you take all those little trigger words away that you can't visualize, in other words, form a picture in your mind, how on earth are you going to answer questions on a comprehension text that you don't know the story trail of? It will be very difficult. In fact, I think 90% of the answers will be incorrect, because the dyslexic child will make up his or her own story, because they will match the pictures and try and figure out a storyline in the pictures that they perceive in their minds. So how do we actually read? To know the brain and how the brain actually functions, we can know more, and we get to know more about the dyslexic brain. So what you see there is basically sight word recognition. The eyes see the word tree, and those configurations of those engrams, in other words, those symbols, the TR and the double E, gets actually taken from the eyes to the visual area, where it gets sent with a nervous impulse to the angular gyrus. It's just there, yeah, in the back of your head. If you look here where I am pointing, in that area, you are actually reading with sight word recognition. So those words you know very well, and we call a dyslexic that has a problem or a miswiring in this part of the brain visually dyslexic. If we go to the other slide, we will see that unknown words, say for instance this word is unknown for this child, they actually call up on Wernicke's area, which is just above your ear. Here's a big part here that actually translates those words and those symbols and breaks up the word into syllables, which gets sounded out. So for each symbol, there's a necessary sound, and we call that phoneme-grapheme integration or sound and symbol integration. These are for more difficult words. Remember, the sight word recognition takes less than 2 seconds, but for phonetic analysis, when you have to decipher the word through breaking up it in syllables and sounding it together and blending it for a final word, it takes much longer than 2 seconds. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is where your auditory dyslexia comes in. If there's a miswiring on this left side of the brain, just above the ear, there's an auditory dyslexic problem. Now, what happens if we write? What we do is when we learn how to write letters on a page, we actually develop the engram, the symbol for that letter or for that sound. Then we go to the frontal lobe in the motor cortex of the brain, and we go and store those letters there. When we need to write it, we go and retrieve those letters there and write it down on the paper. Now, with a dyslexic that has reversals in their spelling and in their writing, they have actually developed and stored the letters with reversed letters in that motor cortex. So when they go and retrieve it, they write it with reversals. That we call motoric or dysnemkinesia, which is reversing the letters. And so often, many people think that that's the only kind of dyslexia, but I'll explain that to you in a second or two. So what we've known now is that reading takes place in the left hemisphere of the brain. For those of you who are not dyslexic, I hope that you will feel on the sides of your heads, and you will feel that there's a definite difference between the parietal lobe above your ear that should be larger than the parietal lobe above your right ear. The dyslexics make use of the right hemisphere of the brain, which is the more creative part of the brain than the dyslexic, than the non-dyslexic, which uses the left side of the brain to read and decipher text. So let me explain to you with the next slide of the pictures of the typical brain. You can go on, please, Natasha. There you will see on the left side, you've got your typical brain. The green area is the visual area, the blue area is the phonetic area, the auditory area, and the frontal lobe is where we speak or we read orally. Broca's area and the motor strip and the tongue and everything come into play. Look at the poor dyslexic left hemisphere brain on the right side. They are vividly trying to use the frontal lobe of